For decades, when we pictured how the brain computes, we envisioned a fixed wiring diagram. Looking at this glowing 3D structural connectome, it is easy to assume that cognition is defined by these physical, anatomical pathways. Concepts like neuroplasticity and population coding explain how these physical connections adapt over months or years. However, they do not account for how neural networks shift priorities in a fraction of a second. To understand that rapid flexibility, we have to look at a dimension of neural processing that operates millisecond by millisecond: time. Mapping the brain's computational power requires looking past its physical architecture to see how it actively routes information across time. Throughout the nervous system, massive populations of neurons exhibit rhythmic fluctuations in electrical activity. These are known as neural oscillations. These oscillations are not imposed from a centralized source. As we see in this local circuit diagram, they emerge from basic cellular interactions. An excitatory node and an inhibitory node connected in a feedback loop naturally generate this rhythmic sine wave pattern. It is vital to understand the role of these rhythms. They do not encode specific sensory data or cognitive memories themselves. Instead, they provide a temporal infrastructure. They act as a pacing mechanism that coordinates how distributed regions of the brain talk to one another. Time operates as a biological scaffold, organizing the flow of communication across the network without dictating the message. Alpha, theta, and gamma frequency bands operate simultaneously. Expanding the slower theta track reveals its coordination of memory in the hippocampus. Highlighting the faster gamma track shifts focus to sensory cortices, where oscillating populations coordinate local feature integration during demanding attention tasks. The nervous system functions as a polyrhythmic engine, shifting between these functional gears to meet immediate behavioral demands. Alpha oscillations present a distinct functional case. Historically, these rhythms were observed most prominently when subjects were awake but resting, with their eyes closed. Because of this association with rest, it was often assumed that alpha waves indicated a brain state of inactivity. Empirical studies suggest a different role. High alpha power correlates with the active suppression of irrelevant sensory inputs. It regulates cortical excitability, effectively filtering out external distractions so the network can maintain internal focus. Alpha oscillations serve as the gatekeepers of cognitive resources, determining which cortical regions are accessible for incoming data. When multiple distributed neural populations align their firing patterns across time, they achieve neural synchronization. In communication through coherence, two connected nodes emit out-of-phase gamma waves. Node A's action potential hits Node B's inhibitory trough, so communication fails despite intact wiring. As they slide into phase alignment, signals hit the excitatory peak, triggering successful data transfer. Oscillatory coherence selectively opens and closes these communication channels, acting as a dynamic switchboard layered over the physical wiring of the brain. This synchronized alignment is transient. Distributed networks continuously lock into sync and fall out of it as physiological states and sensory inputs change. Because multiple neural populations are active at any given moment, they compete for temporal coordination. The specific populations that successfully synchronize their rhythms effectively control the communication channels. Their coherent firing allows their distributed representations to dominate ongoing cognitive processing. In these abstract neural clusters, there is no central master clock dictating the rhythm. Cohesive waves form and fragment through local, transient interactions. The brain's temporal architecture relies on an ongoing, decentralized competition, generating unified cognition out of localized interactions. This composite visualization shows the static structural connectome overlaid with dynamic theta, alpha, and gamma waveforms. Computation emerges from the continuous interplay between these structural populations and their oscillatory dynamics. Notice how functional connections form and dissolve based on phase alignment, while the physical architecture remains unchanged. Temporal coordination regulates communication, while the underlying structure maintains the neural representations. These principles illustrate how distributed neural systems utilize temporal organization to coordinate communication among distant networks. By establishing these dynamics of coordination, we can now examine whether they form the biological substrate for the higher-order cognitive dynamics described by tokenization theory.